From your vantage point, how do you see the global economy, given the momentous political changes that have taken place and its knock-on effect on economic policy and trade?
The change in policies from the largest economy in the world, namely the US, is something that the world will have to start getting used to because it is a major change in terms of openness to trade, in terms of trade barriers, in terms of the kind of fiscal policy that the new government may undertake, which against the backdrop of a tightening monetary policy stance by the US Fed has a real possibility of financial volatility going forward. I think some of this uncertainty may get resolved. For example, what the new government's taxation plan is going to be, which will then impact the fiscal deficit on the US. And some of it may actually add to the volatility going forward if there are too many flip-flops in terms of what is actually going to get implemented. So I think we are at an important juncture, and the possibility of negative consequences for countries around the world is a possibility. I think Asia may come in for special treatment because almost 2/3 of the US trade deficit in goods is with respect to Asia. And we just have to see how things evolve in terms of tangible policy changes, which I think the US government so far seems to be fairly determined to carry through.
Now, how much of a cause for concern is it for an economy like India?
I think it's a cause for concern for the world. I think it's a cause for concern for emerging markets. And in terms of creating financial volatility, I don't think anyone will be safeguarded from it. And we have to manage this as it plays out. There are some things that are under our control, and that is to ensure that we ourselves follow sound macroeconomic stability rules, and I think we are at a good place with respect to that. We have had a budget where the fiscal deficit has been reduced. We have a central bank which has a mandate for flexible inflation targeting. We have reserves which are at over $360 billion, and we have a current account deficit that continues to be modest. So we need to look after these attributes of macroeconomic stability, and that will allow us to withstand some of these sources of turbulence that come from the wider world.
Fed Chief Janet Yellen has signaled a rate hike possibly as early as next month. What would it mean for Indian financial markets and the rupee?
I think the Fed had indicated in December that there would be 2, possibly 3 Fed hikes in 2017. So a fair bit of that is already priced in. Okay. And given that financial markets are forward-looking, from that source alone, I would expect, and I would underline the word expect, that the repercussions may not be that much as compared to when the Fed increased the interest rates in December and issued a hawkish statement. Right. I think that was the news. I think subsequent to that, the Fed views on what it was going to do in 2017 has been fairly consistent.
So, Urjit, we've been sort of, fed on the virtues of globalization for the past 2 decades. President Trump, is increasingly towing a protectionist line. What does this trend mean for an economy like India?
We have had a sustained opening up of our economy since the early 90s, and I don't think that we should change our stance in any way. because we do benefit from an open trade regime. And I think India's policy that the openness of trade should be carried through a multilateral process is the right one. Now, depending on how the U.S. carries forward the agenda that has been put out, and how other major economies react to that, because I think one issue that people are not realizing is that there will be a reaction to what the U.S. does. That could get messy. Hopefully wiser heads will prevail and we won't go down that road. But I think it's important that we should be on the side of keeping borders open with respect to trade and movement of factors of production.
So what, in your opinion, are some of the global worry factors that probably keep you awake at night?
I think the lack of a consistent policy enunciation from major economies is the main source of volatility. I think clearer policies that take into account what in terms of the externalities that they create, if those are not put out in a consistent, well thought out manner, then that causes financial volatility, and given how fast financial flows happen, it affects us very quickly, as indeed it affects other countries. I think in terms of our mandate of the RBI, etc., I think the hardening of some of the internationally traded commodities is something that we need to be worried about, because that would feed into inflation. So there is a real side to it, and there is a financial side to it. By the way, most analysts expect in 2017 the world to grow at a faster pace than 2016. So I think that's the good news.
So on the subject of growth rate, do you think we will be able to achieve 9% plus growth rates anytime soon?
Well, these things, in terms of predicting what are the sustainable growth rates, are not easy to make. If very fundamental reforms take place, especially when it comes to factors of production like land, labor, then a higher growth rate is possible. Now, how much higher than the 7.5 that we are achieving so far is difficult to say. But the fact is we did grow at some point faster than where we are now. But it could very well be that was unsustainable and this is sustainable. So I think 7.5% growth rate is not something to be disappointed.
Not at all.
Yeah.
So Urjit, most finance ministers, over the past few years expect the RBI governor to cut rates. Despite that, this time you've been able to maintain a mildly hawkish stance. Just goes to show that your equation with Mr. Jaitley is terrific.
Well, the best way that a central bank can support growth on a durable basis is to ensure that inflation is low, stable, there is financial stability, and that is the role that the central bank plays. Very few countries grow at a high growth rate if inflation is high and volatile. So I think in a way we are doing our bit to support a higher growth rate, but on a durable basis. And with the constitution of the MPC, we have now diverse views on how the monetary policy is established every 2 months. And I think that's a very important milestone in our economic history, that the monetary policy is now determined through a committee process where there are both independent committee members and representation from the